Welcome to the Sports Entrepreneurs Podcast. I'm your host, Marcus Luer, and I'm excited to have someone all the way in Santa Monica, California on the line here today, Greg Economou. Welcome to the podcast, Greg.
It's good to be here, man.
Yeah, no, awesome. And you're in a beautiful part of the world there. It's later sort of afternoon, evening for you, morning my time here in Malaysia. But before we get into the fun stories and the amazing career you've had, let me just sort of give a quick introduction on yourself, and then we'll go into, as usual, the details. So Craig started his career in the world of sports as a player, professional basketball player in Athens in Greece, and we'll hear about it more later. He spent a couple of years then in college sports in various roles. Started your own company as SME Branding, which was eventually sold to SFX. Started another company with BrandThink. Spent a couple of years in the NBA, was Madison Square Garden, the Guggenheim Media. So very big companies and very interesting experiences, which we'll dig into. And right now, you are the founder and partner in Game One, which is where we're going to get to at the end, and the amazing things you guys are doing there. So, but before we get to that, let's go back to how it all started. Greg, take it away.
Yeah, it's when I was in college, I played basketball at the University of Connecticut, and I went overseas to play. And I think the one trigger point I had is after my first season playing in Athens, I came back and I took an internship with at the time was Fleet Bank in the commercial lending department, and it was an 8 or 10 week internship before I had to report back to training camp for the next season, and it was possibly the longest 10 weeks of my life where I couldn't stand not being around sports, talking about sports, and then it became, an obsession of mine that once I finished playing that I wanted to go back and actually spend my days, working in some capacity in sports, whether that would have been coaching or working in the business side of sports. And I've been really blessed to have been able to do that over these many years.
Yeah. So you spent 3 years in Athens playing, right? From what I can see.
Yeah, so I spent 3 years playing ball, and then I actually injured my back and needed to have back surgery. I did the back surgery and with the intent to rehab and come back and play, because if you're ever looking for a job and somebody's going to pay you to play something, then you should take that job, because it's great to be able to get compensated for doing things that you love. But I never got fully better where I felt confident enough to go play at that level anymore. And I had been rehabbing at UConn, where I went to school, and I ran into the athletic director there one day and said, look, I don't know if I'm going to go back. I'd love your support in trying to find a job. I want to really work in sports. I'd love to work, at ESPN or somewhere like that. And his name was Lou Perkins, big time AD. And he said, well, why don't you work here? And I said, well, that would be great, but how do I do that? And he said, well, you're hired. I want you to be a fundraiser in our athletic department. And so literally hired me, without an interview, without a resume. And I spent my first year and a half or so raising money for the athletic program at UConn. Right. And that's my entree point into the sports marketing world.
I love that, and we'll get back in a minute, but I wanted to just jump one more time back to Athens. First of all, you obviously Greek descent, American, somehow that maybe brought you back to your roots. And playing basketball in the late '80s in Europe, it's obviously a bit different than now. I mean, how did you get there, and what drove you there to go and go back to, let's say, your roots?
I mean, I was one of the few Greek Americans that was playing Division I basketball at the time. And so after my junior year, there was a all-star team of Greek American players that went to play the pro teams in Greece. So I went on I think it was a 2 or 3 week tour, and we played probably 10 games or so. And I played quite well. And so a lot of the teams then started reaching out to me, which, I didn't even consider that, I wasn't even thinking about that. I thought, look, I'll go to college, I'll get a degree, maybe I'll go to law school. And then I got into my senior year and I started getting, I started getting, having conversations with some of the Greek teams, and I hired an agent and ultimately, chose to play for Olympiakos, which, was effectively the Man United or the New York
It's a
Yankees
big team.
league.
Absolutely.
And it was an extraordinary experience because not only, was I able to play a sport I loved and get paid for it, but I was able to really travel, the world to a degree. I mean, I probably traveled to 20 different countries in that time, playing different games and competitions, and the context and kind of background you get from that experience is priceless, truly.
I can imagine. And Greeks are very passionate about their basketball too, right? It was a pretty good
Yeah.
crowds there, right?
Yeah, it was an incredible dynamic. The Greeks have always been have always played really good basketball. In '87, the year before I got there, they actually won the European Championship. They beat the Soviets in the Euro Championships, and I think Nick Gallis, who was the great Greek American but great European player, I mean, one of the greatest of all time. I think he had 57 or 60 points in that final game, and it was, you could see the fervor and the passion that the fans had, and some had it, they were knowledgeable of basketball, and some were just loyal to Olympiakos, so they would just come out and chant, like they would at a soccer game or what have you, and it was really incredible to see the energy and we would, our home games would have 17,000 people,
amazing.
So. It was really great to be a part of.
I love that. And that's a great, awesome story and a good way to warm up here. But now we're going to jump into basically what I would consider sort of your first big hit here, SME Branding.
Yep.
In the mid-90s in New York City, somebody coming out of your couple of years there in the universities there. And again, what I read here, it was a boutique consumer product packaging firm, which doesn't sound very sexy. And you turned this into a very cool sports branding consulting firm. Yep. I want to know more about it.
Well, it was funny. I took a job after UConn, fundraising at UConn. I took a job as the associate AD at SUNY Stony Brook, which is one of the State University of New York, big 25,000 student institution. Mm-hmm. And they were, the SUNY system had decided about the same time that the California system came into play to play Division III sports, not Division I sports. And fast forward to 1990, 1991, they realized after 30 some odd years that they had made a mistake strategically, that they just didn't have the quality and the name recognition of having Division I sports. So they decided to elevate their program. And so I got recruited to go down there and be the number 2 person in the athletic department at a relatively young age. And something very unique happened, which led me into becoming a brand builder. Is I got to the school and the nickname of the school was Patriots. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, okay, that's cool. And my first week on the job, I was seeing a bunch of Patriot logos and hearing people talk about the Patriots. And I picked up a local newspaper and it's had a headline about the Patriots. I'm like, oh, good. There's a lot of buzz and there are people reading the newspaper. And then I realized that they were talking about the local high school, which was also named the Patriots. Okay. So I started to do my own, kind of in-person research and realized that Ward Melville High School, the Patriots of Ward Melville, was one of the most successful athletic programs in all of New York State, and that I would never be able to supersede them at Stony Brook if I was called the Patriots. So I went to the athletic director and to the president of the school and said, can we consider changing the name of the mascot? And so they said yes, if they thought, because my job was to bring in new revenues to support a move to Division I. And so, I ended up putting together a committee and putting together a brand strategy, and I ended up hiring SME, who was a consumer product packaging firm, to help lead me through the process. They had not done sports before, so I was their first sports client. Right. And I met them because one of the Stony Brook alum who was on my committee's brother owned SME, who became my partner. And we built we came up with a new name, Seawolves. We did a great brand identity program, logos and everything else. And we got an enormous amount of a coverage and acclaim for this brand building exercise that we did, which kind of ignited a spark for SME But Ed was a consumer product packaging guy. He wasn't a sports guy. So he bugged me for 2+ years to come join him as a partner in the firm, which I eventually did. And that's how my branding career started as a client. And then I learned the business, and we originally did a handful of colleges like I did. And then we got a handful of pro accounts and started working with the leagues. And we did a couple of expansion teams like the Toronto Raptors and some of those. And before we knew it, we were, 2 or 3 years into this, and we weren't doing any consumer product packaging. We were doing hundreds of sports branding assignments at any given year. And I think over the course of my time there, we did about 1,500 overall, from all over the world at some point, in many different countries, and became the de facto leading branding firm for sports in the world, which was unexpected and incredible at the same time.
And when you say it was always linked to some type of rebranding or creating a unique branding environment for sports platforms or sports IP owners, or that's what the firm was doing, right?
Yeah, at that point, there were either teams that had been either misbranded or poorly branded, or just had tired branding, and so we would do a lot of rebranding. We would take existing programs and kind of go back in and change them. In some cases, it was new branding, right? It was an expansion team, or it was a new property or a new business and what have you. And we would start from scratch, naming and identity and strategy and all those kinds of things. So it was a little bit of everything. We did teams, we did tons of teams, colleges. We did even athletes. We did identities for Vander Holyfield and Tiger Woods.
Oh, wow.
And people were, that were, looking to establish themselves as brands.
I love it. I'm a brand guy too, and I love that. I want to talk more about it, but I also want to keep our pace here. Yep. So the company eventually then was sold to SFX. Hopefully you made some nice money there. Tell me a bit about that part.
Yeah, it was funny because we had built this thing up, and by the late 90s now, we were 30, 40 people in. We had accounts all over the place, and we were cranking along. And one day I got a phone call from a different entity than SFX, and they said, "Hey, we're interested in acquiring you." And I had never been through a merger or acquisition. I had no idea how that worked, and so I made a couple phone calls, and one of our friends of the firm was a big M&A guy, and he introduced me to a young M&A guy at the time, who's also become one of my best friends in the world now. And Pete, his name is Pete Major. Pete helped us kind of frame the company business plan, really shape the business model. And then, we started negotiations with this one firm, and we actually called SFX to try to, because they were in a buying spree, to just create leverage so we could negotiate a better deal with the ad agency that was trying to buy us. And once we called on David Falk and his team, they were like, no, we want to buy you. And then we had a little bit of a, kind of not a bidding war, but just, we had some activity going on, and we ended up packaging it up and selling it to SFX in the roll up of all the sports entities that they did. And then we were there for maybe a year, and then SFX made the strategic decision to focus exclusively on music. So they turned around and bought most of the sports agency owners back out of their deals. So we stayed for a year, and then ultimately what that became was Live Nation. So, right. So it was an interesting process to go through at a relatively young part of my career and understand how, money raising and mergers and acquisitions happen and how they work. And so it was a good lesson to learn early.
Yeah, and it's interesting that obviously your last role was again back at Live Nation with Ticketmaster, right? So you've really gone full circle there. Amazing. Now, we're moving on here. So you left, obviously, then, I'm assuming as typical entrepreneurs, when you get stuck in a big agency, there's a point in time you realize that you need to be back on your own here. So I guess you started BrandThink. Was that sort of a SME 2.0 version, more or less something similar, or very different?
No, it was an offshoot. Like what had happened at SME is when we started doing the branding work, it was very art heavy in the beginning. Like we were doing a lot of logos, we were doing a lot of uniform designs, we were doing a lot of graphics, advertising campaigns. And what we wanted to do to continue to separate ourselves from our competition was be better, strategists. And so we hired one of the leading strategy developers in branding, a guy named Bob McCready, and Bob came in and taught us kind of the principles of writing, brand strategies and business plans. And so my role over the years at SME started to evolve into writing a lot of strategies for clients, where my partner at O'Hara was the chief creative officer. And so I would go into these properties and I would write these, in some cases elaborate or intricate business plans or brand strategies, and it became a passion of mine. And I started to realize that the strategy part had much more impact than just what the brand looked like. It affected every different aspect of the organization. So after we sold SME and then we're bought out, when SFX was buying everybody back out, I didn't want to go back into the same exact thing that I did, but I wanted to go into writing strategies for clients that would ultimately impact their entire business. And so BrandThink was a pure strategy and consulting shop, almost like a mini Bain or a mini McKinsey, but specifically for sports, with expertise around the core elements in sports, whether it be branding, marketing, or onto operations and ticket sales and sponsorship. And we had clients that were across the paradigm, many different kinds of strategies we were writing, from feasibility studies to org structures to better ticket sales strategies to brand strategy in positioning. And we went for 5 years and, had a ton of A-list clients, and we found a nice little niche. It was really fun because it was still mine. It was still my baby. So, I got to nurture it every day.
I love it. Well, but somehow you ended up getting a call from the NBA. I don't know, David Stern or Adam Silver, who called you, and you ended up doing some work with these guys. So how did that all happen? Or what were you doing exactly?
I had done in BrandThink, I had done some major strategy work for a handful of the teams, and particularly one team. And the team got a lot of acclaim. In fact, acclaim in and outside of the sport, and for the strategy that they had employed. And David, was in a league meeting and was asking the team president, like, you guys have done such a great job. How'd you do it? And he said, look, we work with this firm, BrandThink, and their CEO is a really sharp guy, and blah blah blah. And next thing I know, my phone's
which team
ringing.
was that?
The Detroit Pistons. We had done a big rebranding of the Pistons and kind of a lot of strategy work and how they should implement kind of that brand across every different department in the company. And so what we did influenced every single touch point. And when Tom Wilson, who was the CEO of the Pistons, said to David, like, this guy really understands branding, marketing, and he understands sports. And so David called me literally out of the blue. I'd never, I'd met him before just in social settings, but and he said, I want you to come work for me. And I thought honestly that he wanted me to write him a proposal and do some consulting for the league. And he's, no, we're creating a new position that's akin to the chief marketing officer, and we haven't had one in many, many years since Rick Welts left. We want to consider you for that position. And I flew to New York a couple of days later, and he offered me the job on the spot. And so, I was at a crossroads because I loved my agency, and we were doing such really incredible and impactful work. But the chance to actually work for David and Adam, and and try to jump into the NBA, which was frankly at a little bit of a place where they had the fight in Detroit, and they were kind of coming out of that and trying to figure out like what do they need to stand for, where they need to go in the process, and it just felt like a really great opportunity to make a big kind of big imprint, and so I decided to take it.
And looking at the years, is this around, if I vaguely remember, at the same time sort of when Jordan had his last year, which is obviously the movie the series we've all been watching? Is that about right?
Jordan was done already.
He was done already. Okay.
It was the beginnings of LeBron, Dwayne Wade, LeBron. Iverson was still there. Kobe was in full bloom. And it was, to me, the big challenge going into the NBA was it was really a positioning challenge. It was really one of thinking about kind of what the mission of the league needed to be at the time, and how to reposition the brand, in a different way than it had been done. And thankfully David and Adam were, the two most progressive and incredible mentors, teachers, executives, friends that you could ever imagine having. Even though it was sometimes difficult to work with Dave because he was very demanding, but they were open to the exploration, and it was a incredibly collaborative process of rethinking how the league needed to be positioned. And we went through the process and rewrote the mission statement to be much more human and real and digestible, and tangible. And then, following that, we really worked hard to reposition the brand more around the idea of the mission statement, which was to put basketball at the center of everything we do, to be the guardians of the game, to be the most socially responsible sports organization in the world. And, and David lived it, and Adam lived it, and they still live it, and it was great. It was an honor and a privilege, and to be part of kind of the thinking around, what has become, really embedded in the DNA of the NBA.
Yeah. I mean, and your branding, I guess, career then continued, right? You obviously worked with a particular team for a couple of years then as well. The Charlotte Hornets, right? Although it's called the Bobcats Sports and Entertainment Company, but it's the Charlotte Hornets as the team. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it was the Bobcats when they, the Hornets moved to New Orleans from Charlotte, and then the league put a new team in called the Bobcats, and the Bobcats had been in existence for 5 years, had struggled on the court, had struggled mightily off the court. We're really last in the league in many different categories off the court in terms of the business, whether it was ticket sales or sponsorship. We didn't have a naming rights partner. We didn't have a really terrific TV deal, and so. But Michael Jordan had come in as a minority owner and as the head of basketball, and from my connections with David Falk and Curtis Polk and Esty Portnoy, they knew me from those days at SFX, and so they were looking for somebody to run the day-to-day operations of the team, and they knew I was at the league, and so I took the job, and it was an incredible challenge, because our on the court product. I was there for 3 full seasons, and the best year we had, I think, was 31-51. So we were dealing with a substandard product on the court. Our players were great guys, but we didn't have all-stars. So there was the idea of marketing around star players was not feasible because we just didn't have all-stars. So it was really about, how do we get in and, position this thing around this is a civic initiative. This is about the city of Charlotte. We lost one team. Let's not lose another. Let's figure out how to rally and support this thing. Let's figure out how to ultimately put ourselves in position to build a successful infrastructure so that when the team did succeed, that they were able to maximize. And so we ended up selling the naming rights to Time Warner Cable. We sold the broadcast rights to Fox, which got us back into the kind of economic standing we needed to be in from those kind of core pieces. We almost doubled our ticket sales. We almost doubled our sponsorships. So it was the hardest job from the perspective of we were working with very little, resources and assets because we were a small market team with not many wins. But, the thing I think I'm most proud of there was not the success that we had business wise, but the team that I built. Mike Toman, Nick Barledge, Jake Reed, all these, great all-stars, Michael Thompson, Carter Ladd, Chris Marciani, all these guys went on, and they're all, Mike Toman's the president of Legends, and Nick Barledge is the president of the Cavaliers, and Jake Reed is the president of Sporting KC. And, I proved myself, I think, as a good GM, so to speak, where I was out recruiting young talent and trying to find and motivate people to do a good job. And, I was able to, through whether it was skill or luck or a combination thereof, put a team together that was, phenomenal. And, it helped turn around the franchise from the business perspective. And it was a lot to be proud of.
I love it. I love it. And the part I like as well is that, I mean, you clearly come from the sort of, let's say, branding side, from at least, what we talked about just now, what I can see here in your career path. But you are slowly then, and your next role at Madison Square Garden was much more focused on the revenue side, right? So you became a sales guy, which is what I am too. So I say this with all affection. So how did that transition go from really being more branding, consulting, to now saying, look, we got to go find the money here?
Yeah, I think, part of it was, my responsibilities in Charlotte were across the board marketing and sales. And despite having a lot of obstacles in a small market and, some difficulty, we did do some big deals. We did, bring in a big naming rights partner at a really great, deal for the team. We brought in a media rights partner. We grew the business, and I think I was getting more known. I always felt like a sales guy, but I was usually selling for myself, right? I was selling my agency services. Right. I was selling in like an idea to the commissioner or what have you. And in this case, it was like I had now finally the scorecard of, hey, are you getting the deals done? And I think I was recognized in the league as somebody who could not only think about kind of the strategy and the positioning and branding, but somebody who could actually manifest that into success revenue wise. And so when the MSG thing came along, it was the chance to go work for my hometown team, right? I grew up in New York and grew up idolizing the Knicks and Rangers. And so it was a chance to kind of come home, so to speak. And also what intrigued me about it was no matter what kind of deal you're doing, you're adding, 1, 2, or 3 zeros to the end because of the size of the market and the size of the brands. And to be in the middle of multi-million dollar deals was super exciting. And so, yeah, it was almost the 360 of like, I started as a pure brand guy and now I'm, sitting in a chair that is overseeing a bunch of revenue lines and had very little impact on the brand positioning of the actual property and the teams. But, it was equally as awesome, just different.
Was Scott O'Neill there at that time? Was he already the president?
Scotty was president of the sports group, and Mike Baer was president of the media group. And when I got there, Jay Marciano was president of the entertainment group, and he left and to go to AEG. And Melissa Orman took over, and I worked for all of them. Like I worked to drive revenue for each of the 3 major divisions, working across all the venues. So we had 7 venues at the time, 3 networks. So we were working. We had consolidated it. They had, when I got there, there was a very decentralized revenue model where each department was responsible for their own revenue generation. And I convinced the CEO, Hank Ratner, to rethink that and consolidate everything and create some economies of scale and some expertise in certain areas. But we brought that all into kind of a central place. And then my responsibility was to kind of fill the coffers of the 3 divisions. And so
awesome.
Worked across them.
Yeah, when Scott is a friend as well, and fellow YPR, he has been on the podcast. So has David Falk. So we got a good group of people here already. And who you worked with over the years. It's fantastic. Now then you ended up with another big name, the Guggenheim Media company, I guess part of Dick Clark production here. So you're going from a venue, now you're going into content business and entertainment. How did that jump happen?
Well, I had been good friends with Rick Welts over the years, and he had gotten the job at Golden State, and I had worked with Peter Guber's Mandalay outfit, when I was at SME, and so when they had taken over and they were contemplating their new arena, which ended up being the Chase Center in San Francisco, but before they even knew kind of where it was going to be and how it was going to be, we were in the midst of a major renovation or transformation transformation at Madison Square Garden.
Right.
And we had done an incredible job, monetizing the new building, like figuring out how to, create products, whether they be ticket products or premium products or sponsorship assets. And we did an enormous kind of changeover to our revenue model by creating a whole bunch of new assets. And so Rick and Peter wanted to pick my brain, and we spent a good amount of time together talking about it. They made some visits to New York. I set them up talking to different folks within the kind of the revenue streams at the Garden, talking to the architects and everyone else, just so they could start to get their ideas together. And I really had a hankering to move to LA. My whole family over the years had relocated to Arizona, and I was the lone soldier back on the East Coast with my family. And so I really wanted to move to LA, and Peter had started asking me if I would be interested in coming to work for Guggenheim. And I would be based in LA, and they owned the Dodgers and Dick Clark and Prometheus Global Media, which was Billboard Magazine and Hollywood Reporter and a few others. Yep. And ultimately he came at me with a good offer, and I really wanted to relocate, which I'm really blessed and love. I love it out here, and so I jumped into that. But it was a totally different kind of job. You went from a facility-based, team-based operation to, we own, they owned a team, but they and a facility, but the crux of my job there was to build a branded content studio, and really leveraging the assets that they already had. They were going to look to buy more assets over time. They eventually didn't buy too many other ones, but we were able to build a really progressive and one of the first branded content studios of its kind. 2013 branded content really even wasn't even a phrase yet. We started figuring out like, hey, there's some staple shows on networks and on other places that we could create a whole bunch of companion content or shoulder programming, and we could package that and sell it to alternative distributors and, make more money. And it was not that different than what you'd see on ESPN. I mean, my model, I kept saying to the team, was College Game Day. It used to be a football game, the ABC feed would come on at 1:00 and you'd get 5 minutes of an intro, and then the game would kick off at 1:05. And then when it was over, it would go to a boxing match, and then, somebody at ESPN said, hey, we should actually talk for 3 hours before the game. And then we should talk at halftime, and then we should talk for 3 more hours after the game. Right. And we should sell all that ad time to somebody, and we'll make twice as much money as we do normally. And so I just took that model and said, look, let's go find places, spaces. Let's go find things to talk about. Let's go develop a whole different kind of set of content, and then get brands to pay for it all. And we went from really starting effectively from scratch to a point where we were doing an enormous amount of multi-million dollars per year in brand support against these assets that we had built. And, it was super interesting. I love making content. It was what really led me to what I'm doing now, because I learned kind of how do you conceptualize it? How do you package it? How do you pitch it? How do you win it? How do you execute it? I was just doing it at a more of a short form format than what we're doing now at Game One. But it was an incredible lesson. The only thing I didn't love about it was I was the least amount of stuff I was doing was for the Dodgers. So right. I was effectively moving out of sports further and further as we were doing more, Hollywood oriented or music industry oriented content. And I felt like I love what I'm doing, but I miss my tribe. I miss the people that I've grown up with in this business for 20 plus years, and the people that I have developed incredible relationships with, and my passion. My passion was always, as a former athlete, as somebody who had worked in front offices for many years, I just, and then by that point had, 3 athletic sons that were playing everything. I wanted to get back into sports. And so when Jared Smith at Ticketmaster called me and said, hey, I need somebody to run the sports division and really think differently about the ticketing business, it was appealing to me, if only for I like the other parts of it, but I really like being back in the industry again and being able to build something, with my people. So it was, the Guggenheim Media was probably the most important job I had, because it led me to do what I'm doing now.
I can see that easily. Absolutely. Yeah, very interesting. And so Ticketmaster, in a sense, was just a little bit of a step back into the world of sports. You were the head of sports there, and obviously Ticketmaster does. I don't know, they would do more tickets for entertainment than sports, or what's the breakdown there roughly?
Yeah, it's similar, right? The size of the scope of the business in terms of the amount of tickets. The music division probably makes more money only because a lot of the way they did their accounting, a lot of the events in a sports venue that were musical would be counted as a music account. So, but for me, it was great because my real passion when I got to Ticketmaster was to figure out how to reposition the brand, and not just from a B2C standpoint, but also from a B2B standpoint, because Ticketmaster had been perceived as a software company, and sometimes if you have a problem with your software, then you get a demerit, and if you're not building merits on the other side, it starts to get a little uneven. And so my job was to try to figure out, like, how do I actually bring more to the table than just the software? And how do I bring consulting? How do I bring kind of data and analytics? How do I bring more media and marketing power and really help these properties in the full cycle of selling what they need to sell, not just in the I operate your software. And so that part was super entrepreneurial. I got a lot of room to run with that. We were doing some really incredible and game-changing things for the company, which was great. But I met Basil along the way, and Basil Iwanek, my partner, who's a super prolific movie producer in Hollywood. He's done, he owns the John Wick franchise, the Sicario franchise. He did a Star and Wind River. He did so many incredible movies, and we became friends, and we started talking about, sports content. And I was giving him my perspective, having done the Guggenheim thing mostly for entertainment properties, and then saying, look, I'm surprised that the sports industry has not rallied enough yet and doesn't really maximize or optimize their opportunities as much as they do. And from his perspective, he was getting a lot of demand from distributors for more sports content. And we just kept putting our heads together, sometimes socially and sometimes strategically. And then ultimately I was like, I really want to be a storyteller. Like, I want to get into, the content creation game again. But with Basil, I had a chance to get into it in a much broader way than just short form content and social and digital content. I got a chance to get into it from a perspective of making feature films and making scripted television series and shows and documentaries and podcasts and many, many different things. In addition to, we do a lot of short form stuff as well. But for me, it was the ultimate combination of, I get to be in sports, in the heart of sports, but I get to be, telling stories and still get that piece of the entertainment world or the Hollywood world that, I kind of liked at Guggenheim, but, now that I can combine it with sports, I love it. So
it's the ultimate trick. Yeah. And that's what the podcast is basically all about too, right? It's a storytelling podcast about someone's career and the learnings on the back of it. And you've come back into your entrepreneur part as well, after sort of almost 14 years, or it looks like here, where you've been more working in the corporate world. How does that feel, being back and now in charge and doing your own thing?
I mean, I always wanted to, and it was just trying to find the right thing to go back to, right? And so, there was nothing better for me. I spent the better part of a decade being my own boss and owning my own thing, and
Absolutely.
it was the most exciting feeling for me. Even when the times were tough and you were wondering if you had enough money to make payroll, it was like, it is almost the epitome of what it was like to be an athlete. It was like, look, it's on me. I have to perform. Like, I have to work harder. I have to go learn new skills. I have to do things that are going to help me succeed. The one advantage of working for big companies is you get a chance to have resources to do things that you may not be able to do as a small business owner. And so you get a chance to manage. My budgets at Madison Square Garden, the NBA, were monumental compared to what I was used to at small companies. But at the same token, like I was hankering to get back and be my own boss, or at least be in a partnership where we had some freedom to run, can be completely entrepreneurial, can kind of implement the things and the processes and best practices that I've learned over the years and felt were the most advantageous without having anyone telling me, hey, I don't really want to do that right now, or no, we don't have the budget to do that right now. It's like, if I want to do it, I got to go make the budget happen. Then it's on me. I got to go work, be smart, and have some ingenuity to figure out how to support it. But then I'll go do it. So it's fantastic.
I love it. And I mean, for all intents and purposes, Game One is a startup, right? You guys are about a year plus old, and you may be a startup with a lot of firepower, but you are still a very young company. And you use the word elevated content. So tell me a bit more about what that really means to you. What is elevated content?
Yeah, we've been coining that phrase because when you think about what athletes have done, a lot of short form content, some excellent, much of it's excellent, but it's predominantly short form. Teams do very regionalized content because of league rules. In leagues do some incredible content. Media companies are obviously making content, but what we were trying to figure out is how do we position ourselves so that people understand exactly what we do. And what elevated to us means is that it's cinematic and beautiful and meaningful and cultural, but it also means that it's national or international. Like, there's some really incredible content on by teams that is going to appear on a regional sports network or on a YouTube channel that may have enough oomph and power that it should be a national platform, but they just haven't gotten there yet, right? And there's some athletes that have a lot of great stories to tell, but they don't have the knowledge or wherewithal to figure out, like, how do I actually take that idea and bring it somewhere that I can have a very meaningful cinematic experience at a national level or an international level. And so we're a bridge between sports and Hollywood. We in a couple different ways. One, we have a pathway for people to tell those stories and get elevated to a place where we've got these beautiful things coming out on big national platforms. Like networks or studios or streamers or what have you, and at the same token, we work really hard with our projects to connect Hollywood to sports. So whether it's the greatest storytellers in the world or Hollywood people, right? They're making these great, incredible movies and TV series and shows and movies and blah, blah, blah. And so how do we connect those people who are also many of them are also sports fans? So how do we appeal to their sports fandom and their fanaticism for maybe the team they grew up rooting for or the sport that they love, and kind of bring them into the sports realm or bring the sports realm into their realm, so that we're connecting those dots and really getting the best IP that sports has to offer, that people are sitting on and not optimizing with the best storytellers. And how do we put that together? And that's ultimately kind of the core positioning. And ultimately we'll end up with elevated content. We'll end up with the very premier, beautiful, impactful, and wide-ranging as possible as we can create.
Right. Yeah, and wide-ranging clearly is. I mean, reading what is there publicly out there, and I think you shared some sort of an article. It really is from feature film all the way to short form, branded content, even I guess podcast. But where is the focus right now? Or are you really trying to do everything, which is always hard to do, I guess?
I think the way we've simplified it is, let's find the story first, right? Let's figure out what the story is first. And then we can figure out where that should live. Okay. And so if the story is big enough and long enough and has enough power, like, it can become a feature film. If it's an infant, if it's still strong and beautiful, but let's maybe start it as a podcast and see if we can grow it. And then somewhere in between, it's like we fancy ourselves as storytellers, and the format is the format. We'll figure that out as we go. And when you look at our development slate, we have in total we've identified probably 120 projects that we have in some level of development, but there's probably 40 of them that are like we're nurturing along toward, either have sold or toward sale. Mm-hmm. And, those 40 are probably 10 feature films, 10 scripted things, or 5 scripted things, 15 unscripted things, and 5 podcasts. So there is a blend. We have a range of different specialists. We have people that develop scripted programming. We have people that develop unscripted programming. So it just depends what we identify. And if something's identified as a documentary, we give it to one of the developers that do more unscripted documentary style stuff. If we think it's a scripted, we bring it to an expert that understands how to source writers and then ultimately directors and actors and puts together a piece of scripted programming. So I love the variety. Like I love the diversity. It gives us a chance to spread our wings in a number of different channels, which is always fun, for an entrepreneur.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that part. That's exactly what I do. Now, what I was going to ask, how do you, when it comes to picking the story, which is what you said, where at the end of it all starts, are you approaching an athlete where you're going, look, we know this guy, he has an amazing story and we want to dig in, or what's the process here?
Yeah, no, it's a combination. I mean, we are constantly, researching and looking for opportunities, ideas. We're looking to option books or plays or life rights, and so we're constantly seeking where, and then we're figuring out where those stories live, and if they live with an athlete or they live at a team or they live at a league, then we put together a treatment and go to them and say, we really want to work with you on trying to bring this to life. We can work out some kind of financial arrangement, but like we really want to be partners with you on the intellectual property. And in some cases we pitch those things, and I had an instance yesterday where we pitched a professional team 4 ideas that we thought might be interesting, and by the end of the call we had a 5th idea that was better than the 4 combined that we're now going to focus on, that came out of a brainstorm. One of the people on the other side was like, how about this? And then we just started to riff on it, and now we're back writing the treatment up for the 5th idea, and we're putting the other 4 in the drawer and saying maybe we'll come back to those, maybe we won't need to. So it's really a case by case. Sometimes athletes or teams come to us and say, we have this, we want to tell this story, or we want to buy these rights. Can you work with us to do that? And we then we go and use our expertise as storytellers to bring that together, and always in conjunction with the partner. So whether it's an athlete or a team, it's a completely collaborative process. We're not necessarily buying IP and then going away in the lab and creating it on our own. We really want to make it as integrated as we possibly can.
Yeah, awesome. And I think we all know it always needs something which sort of puts it on the radar and people to start really. I mean, sports movies have been out there forever, and I'm one of the biggest fans. I love, I've probably been in tears on most of them. But I would say The Last Dance might have come quite at an opportune time for you as well, right? Because clearly it took this whole genre out to a new level, especially now where we don't have live sports as much. Your thoughts on that? I'd love to hear.
Yeah, I think what the quarantine of the pandemic has done is it changed consumption habits, which I think many of them will be permanent, right? The way people consume content, the kind of content they want to consume, just in general, it has been totally kind of transformed. When it comes to sports, yes, I mean, we all as sports fans have missed watching live sports. It's been terrible not to have that, understandably so, but it's very difficult. And so I think when Last Dance hit, it was a break from, the doldrums of not having, newness in sports. And so having this incredible story of the most, arguably the greatest, and if not the most prolific athlete that we have all ever seen, and getting a behind the scenes look. But what it did was it satiated our thirst for sports, but it also showed us that, hey, these stories are maybe as compelling as the games, like getting behind the scenes, and maybe there's room for more and more of these. So yeah, we had nothing to do with Last Dance, but I'm a fan of all sports content. So kudos to the folks who put it together. But yes, it acted as a bellwether for us to go out and have many, many conversations about unscripted programming, documentaries and talk shows and reality shows and game shows and things that, had been taken for granted in the industry of sports, not in other industries, but in the sports industry. And now, it quickly are a celebrated art form form, right? Where people want more stories, they want more documentaries, they want more behind the scenes and access. And so, yeah, I think with the change in consumption habits and kind of the awakening to this form of storytelling, we couldn't be at a better intersection than we are right now.
Yeah, I have no doubt that in The Last Dance, some would, it was this sort of, it might have been something which just nicely came for you guys, and now we'll kick it off even more. Now, you're already working on a couple of bigger projects, and I know there's a few names you've sort of publicly mentioned, from James Harden to Danica Patrick. Can you talk a bit more specifically on a couple of examples, exactly what you guys are doing there?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting part for us is, if you look at the back of my business card, it says sports, culture, and stories. And so what we're ultimately seeking are stories that are meaningful culturally. At times we'll do sports for sports, but for the most part, we're looking to figure out, like, how does the story that we're telling about an athlete, about a team, about a situation, about a game, about a season, how does that have a broader impact on society and on culture? So Danica Patrick, for instance, great race car driver, female, competing against males, like one of the few athletes in the world that, female athletes in the world that actually, would compete against men day in and day out.
Absolutely.
And held her own for many, many years. And also is a dynamic personality, in many different ways, as a business person, as a media personality, as a spokesperson for health and wellness, an endorser of brands and products. And so we approached Danica with this idea that we do a show about gender equality, about women that compete in a man's world and succeed, and how do they do it? What are the secret sauces, and what obstacles do they face and continue to face, and really create kind of a narrative over the course of hopefully many years of how women succeed and how they thrive and how they are able to further not just themselves, but culture, right? And so, that is a magazine style show that we're packaging right now, and Danica will be the host, and we'll talk to people, the range of people from politicians to business people to other athletes to just regular everyday women that succeed in jobs that you would think are meant for men, and showing the world that, hey, equality is not an aspiration. It's something that has been achieved, and we just need to do more of it. So
she will be the host, as in she will do the interviews?
Yeah, she will be the host, and she'll be an executive producer on it as well. So, so a good transition for her in post racing career, in really turning up the volume on her media personality and kind of broadcast. Yeah. Exactly.
So, and this is what we're talking about, half an hour show or sort of longer, shorter. What are we talking about here?
We're programming it as an hour-long show, 3 interviews per show. So, you're talking about 3 different women that will, she'll be on site, going to the places where they are and embedding herself into their worlds and understanding how they tick and what challenges they faced and still face. And, it should be, I think it's going to be really compelling content, but it's also going to be really meaningful content. It's time that, we put some flags in the ground, whether it's about, gender equality or race equality or, ethnic equality. I mean, it's time for, for us to stand up. And if we can play a role in that and, and have a mouthpiece or a bullhorn that says, people, you need to pay attention to this stuff, we're glad to do it.
I love it. Oprah Winfrey, watch out. Danica Patrick is coming. Awesome. Now, two sort of follow-up question from there. Number one is, obviously, in your previous careers, you did a lot of work with broadcasters. SMG has its own, platforms, et cetera. What's your target right now? Is it really, from the traditional broadcast to, of course, OTT and all the short forms on Twitches, et cetera? How do you go, where are you placing content? Or are you talking to everyone?
Everyone. I would say, if you look back, you turn the clock back 5 or 6 years, you had 5 or 6 major national buyers of content, right? You had, your ESPN and HBO Sports and NBC Sports, and then you had a collection of, smaller, not paying very much. And you fast forward, 5 years, and you have 50 buyers of premium content, whether it's streamers or whether it's, much more powerful offshoots of primary networks, or whether it's the cable networks that have now multiplied, HBO as HBO Max, and, there's just more and more and more people. And now you have podcasters. So you have, what used to be radio networks are now, potentially sports podcasting networks. And, and then the social media has grown so significantly that there's some real distribution power in even on the social media side. So it goes back to what's the story, and therefore what's the format, and then therefore how do we target what kind of distribution we want. So it all kind of ladders up, where it's like, look, we're not going to take something that has the potential to be a feature film and try to make it a podcast.
Sure.
Now we might make a feature film that we go to a studio and partner with, and then we develop a shoulder program that's a podcast about the movie. Yeah. But ultimately, it starts with what is the story and what's the best form for that story, and then that will dictate kind of what your distribution strategy is. So we are already across multiple distribution channels, with multiple formats, and I think over time it'll be, the time will tell, but it's, frankly, it's, where's the most demand, we'll chase it. So.
Got it. Yeah, makes sense. And in terms of funding, you're using the Hollywood model. You're raising funds against a particular project, whatever they call it, slates, etc. Is that sort of your model you're following, or you have a pool of funding there through a fund, or how does it work?
Combination of things. I mean, we have, we raised money. We'll continue to raise money over time, especially as the company continues to scale like it has been. We will invariably do a few slate deals, and do third-party financing on particular projects. But in addition to that, we're going to do I think a lot of our funding is actually going to come through brand partnerships. Okay. What I'm seeing is corporations are, I think we're seeing an equally monumentous kind of transition happening in brand marketing, where brands would buy spots and dots and kind of spend a lot of money on 30-second spots, or on ad banners on websites. And I think what we're seeing now happen is that brands are realizing they also need to be producers. They also need to be owners of IP. They also need to be integrators. Still important is the advertising, but the dynamics are changed, and brands are involving themselves in kind of the content creation and distribution process like they never have before. And I think, one thing that's unique about us is, we have a very traditional filmmaker in Basel who, has made, billions of dollars worth of box office happen. So, check that box. My other partner, Michael Smith, comes from, more the talent side, and, being a host and an interviewer and an anchor. But he also is a very accomplished unscripted producer, and very good in, kind of the short form side of the fence. And then my world is more the brand world. And so you kind of put all those pieces together and you figure out, like, all right, brands spending money, and Basel needs money to produce movies and TV shows. Well, how do we start partnering those folks up who have very deep pockets, but haven't really optimized their place in the kind of the content ecosystem? And so I think we're going to see a change over time. Hopefully we're part of leading that change. But I think you're going to see a different way brands spend in the space, and where the return is coming from. And in some cases, look, brands need to invest in some of this content because they need to show their stakeholders that they're investing in things that matter, that are meaningful, that are culturally relevant, and not just buying ads on different platforms. Right. I think, you don't always need to build brand equity through volume. Sometimes you build it through value. And, it's really about, having the right message and the right approach to the right stakeholders.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, let's take Red Bull as a extreme example, right? They're not just putting their logo on things; they are owning the IP and on the back of it creating value. So they might not everyone might have the budget and the firepower of Red Bull, but I think what you're talking about and letting brands coming in, maybe having some slice of the IP, and on the back of it having completely different monetization models. I think that's exactly what the world needs right now.
You think of, a big brand who spends, hundreds of millions of dollars in advertising a year, and some even more than that. If they put 12 million bucks into a movie and the movie was a huge success, they'll actually get the similar bang for the buck that they would have gotten, advertising somewhere else. But they also may have a piece of the action in the movie, and so they actually can pay themselves back and probably profit on that investment. So they can then turn around and invest even more than they would have in other content projects that will garner them, even more brand equity. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Absolutely. Where, they, ultimately paying for themselves to advertise, making money on advertising, which is a novel idea, but I think doable. So
yep, I get it. I think that's I love it. It's brilliant, and it's a beautiful way of pretty much everything you've done in your career, from branding to selling, of course, and now you're in the content space. They're creating all that, so I can see why you're having fun there.
Look,
it's awesome.
Every project, if you look at the projects we're packaging and putting out there, some are getting bought and some are produced already and some are, waiting to be bought, and ultimately we're in kind of development mode. But when I look at them from top to bottom, as a fan, remove myself as a principal in the company, as a fan, I'm like, I can't wait to see that. I can't wait to see that. I can't wait to, to listen to that. I can't wait to go to the theater and watch that movie. And so, it's exciting from that perspective because, as sports lovers like we are and fanatics like we are, like we've always consumed whatever sports comes along. And, and so I, as a fan, I love what we're doing. And then when I layer myself in as somebody who owns part of the company and, and obviously helps run the day-to-day of the company, then, it becomes doubly exciting because, it's mine, it's my baby. And I'm getting to watch my baby grow up and have success. And that's, that's a really fun thing to be a part of.
Yeah, I can see that. Now, obviously, from what I know, the studios are a bit stuck right now. Movies are not being produced. How are you guys getting around that there are a whole bunch of restrictions right now in terms of production?
Yeah, look, we've shifted a little bit. We've got some stuff going on, like in a very skeletal crew kind of way. So we're doing whatever we can to get out there and create some of that stuff. But we've shifted kind of our focus from, all right, if we can't actually go out and put a crew out and produce something, like let's shift and start developing more ideas and start packaging more things, so that when we do get kind of the clearance, maybe we're, slightly behind on a production schedule, but we're further ahead because we have 20 more projects than we might have had because we use this time wisely and efficiently to create new ideas. So it's been incredibly beneficial to us to be in quarantine in a way, because we've gotten a chance to really think about the stories that we want to tell, do a lot of research, and we've had a lot of direct access to the sports industry that normally wouldn't be as direct, only because everyone would be busy playing games or traveling or working on deals. And now it's kind of like, all right, like, can you talk tomorrow? Which might take 2 or 3 weeks normally. Now it's tomorrow. So it's
that's true.
That part for us has been, we've shifted our the way we're doing things in the short term, like many other companies are doing, but we're trying to find the silver lining in not being able to throw a crew out and start filming again.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so, which will be the first one which we can expect to come out? Is there one particular one you can mention already?
I can't mention it because we haven't released it yet. Like, we haven't released the PR behind it, but it's a feature film that we wrapped before COVID. It's phenomenal. Awesome. It is going to be, I think, a big hit. Has a huge movie star in the middle of it. It's a sports theme. We're really proud of it, but we're waiting to do the release on it for a bit. But we have a couple documentary films that we got largely in the queue before COVID. We have we're in process right now. We mentioned in our release the Deshaun Watson project we're working on called Face of a Franchise, which is a really cool idea, kind of chronicling what it takes for a star player, the pressures and highs and lows that it takes to kind of be a face of a franchise or a star player. Which he's phenomenal, and he's so intelligent and smart and just hardworking, and it's just so fun to kind of be a fly on the wall to what it takes for him to do what he does, and it's admirable, it's exciting, and so we're capturing as much of that stuff right now as we can. But that one will come out. We have a couple of the Harden projects that we mentioned in our release that was out last week, which was, they're great projects. One is a beautiful documentary about basketball in LA, and one is really about kind of the nuances of great moves in basketball, like, and where did they form, who was the author of those moves, the killer crossover, the dream shake, the up and under, those kinds of things. So the step back, so
bringing your own basketball experience back in there too a little bit, I'm assuming. Full circle.
I try to sound like the expert as much as I can, but sometimes when you're brainstorming with NBA players, you take the back seat really quickly. So
you had your own playing career, which is awesome. Now the movie you were talking about, is it like a Netflix, or you are more the traditional release route?
Yeah, theatrical release. Okay. Meant to go wide to many theaters. We'll see what happens. I mean, obviously with COVID-19 and quarantines, it was supposed to hit theaters this winter. We'll see what happens, and whether we hold it back or whether we transition into more of a streamer play, we'll see.
Awesome. Craig, we could go on forever here. I love the conversation. You have such a obviously amazing and colorful background, and what you're doing right now is equally exciting. But we do have to watch our time on your end and for our listeners. So I want to thank you here, first of all. I'd like you to please say hello to Basil from my son. He's a huge John Wick fan, so he loves these movies, and he actually introduced him to me. I have to admit, I wasn't that familiar with them initially, but we've now watched them all together, so it's a good entertainment there for us. And enjoy your late afternoon or evening there in Hollywood, in LA, and really enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun, and let's do this again sometime.
Definitely, great.
The Sports Entrepreneurs by Marcus Luer podcasts are a collection of interviews and stories. All content in this podcast is the copyright of Marcus Luer. Reproduction and distribution of the presentation without written permission of the owner is prohibited. All rights reserved.